Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So one of the sort of elephants in the room when we're looking at medieval martial arts is, where is the pugilism? As many people know, pugilism, or boxing as it became later known, was very prominent in the sort of from about the 17th century onwards. But where is it in the medieval sources? We know that in the ancient world, the Greeks and Romans had forms of pugilists, and in fact had a form of gladiator who only fought against each other, not against people with weapons, of course, who had a sort of bound hand and bound forearm. And this was, of course, a form of early boxing. And we know equally from Egyptian art that some form of boxing was done, and obviously from Asian martial arts as well. We know that in the medieval period there were forms of striking art. So why isn't it in the medieval treatises? Why is there no real boxing or even any conventional punching to speak of in the medieval treatises? Well, first off, there are strikes with the hands shown in medieval treatises. If we look at Fiore di Liberi or Paulus Cal, for example, we can see strikes done with kind of hammer fist. We can see strikes done with, debatably, with the back of the hand here, and we can see palm strikes done. It has to be said the majority of strikes with the hand seem to either be done hammer fist or palm strike. Why might this be? Well, if we look at modern self-protection as a sort of analogue, as a comparison, these open-handed strikes, or indeed strikes with the hammer fist, are taught sometimes in preference to striking with the front of the fist in order to preserve the fingers and the knuckles. As many of you out there, as many of the viewers will know, it's very, very common when punching someone else with a fist, especially in the head, to injure the hand. Now, so that's one possible reason why those strikes were shown in preference to sort of fist, normal, punch strikes with the front of the fist, be it a hook or be it a jab. Now, why aren't the kind of hand strikes shown more? Well, you have to look at where they are shown in the medieval treatises, and where they are shown in medieval treatises, certainly if we look in the context of Fiore, it's to assist wrestling. So the strike is done usually to soften up a person or a limb or someone's attention or balance, this type of thing, or just cause pain for a moment in order to facilitate something else. So the strike isn't there as a sort of end point, as something to aim towards. They're not standing there duking it out, whether it be with hammer fists or conventional fists. They're literally doing a strike, bam, in order to do something else, be it a throw, a hip throw, or maybe a disarm, this kind of thing. Now, disarm, that's where we get into the thing here. So medieval treatises have a lot of wrestling. It's very, very clear that the medieval Western European, and indeed for the large part I believe Eastern European and Asian as well, traditions focus on wrestling rather than striking. Why might this be? Well, quite simply, we're dealing with worlds where most people are armed. Okay, now if you think about punching and kicking arts, they tend to come about in places where they either have a sporting context, like Thai kickboxing, for example, or they have a self-defense purpose, for example, Savate or karate, Okinawan karate, in a context in which most people don't walk around with a weapon. As soon as you have weapons in the mix, and if we're talking about medieval Europe, then it's going to be something like a dagger. Remember that this utterly changes the fight, and anybody in a medieval town or countryside or city would have at least one of these. They might indeed have a sword, of course, but as I've mentioned in a huge number of my videos, in lots of Europe it was illegal for most common people, not the nobility, but for most common people, to walk around in towns and cities wearing swords, because they'd found, well, we know from documentaries, evidence that they had found that people who did wander around with swords tended to cause more fatalities than people who didn't wander around with swords, and they were more likely to cause civil unrest or be more dangerous to the people in charge. So just like today, the government prefers the population to be less well armed than the government is. Same thing then, of course. But just about anybody in medieval Europe could walk around with a form of dagger or knife. Not necessarily a rondel dagger as I'm holding here, it might be a bollock knife, or it could be a form of eating knife even, but basically everyone, male and female, probably from children upwards, had a form of knife. Now, if people have access to knives or daggers instantly, is boxing, or indeed kicking, particularly useful? Not really, no. You can take someone who's a very good boxer, or indeed someone who's a very good kickboxer. If they come up against an untrained but determined person with a knife, my money's on the person with the knife most of the time, unfortunately. And this is a reality we have to embrace if we're being realistic about the world of martial arts. The fact is, as soon as someone picks up a weapon, that's a game changer. Whether it's a kitchen knife or a pocket knife, obviously larger blades are generally more dangerous than smaller blades, although there's some exceptions to that. It can be easier to grab and disarm larger blades than smaller blades. And obviously the smallest blade, something like a Swiss Army knife, is less dangerous because it doesn't have enough blade length. It's one of the reasons for the 3-inch law in the UK. It doesn't have enough blade length to necessarily kill someone very easily because it can't go deep enough. But anything above that sort of length, anything from medium length, most of your common kitchen knives can kill a person very, very easily. And they're extremely dangerous. And the better trained you are, the better prepared you'll be to deal with that. But most people of either no training or a bit of training are going to really struggle against an attacker who has a knife or a dagger. So, bringing this back into the medieval world, if we think about a society where everybody has quick and easy access to a knife or dagger, at least, maybe a sword, at least a knife or a dagger, punching or kicking is only useful as a supplement to wrestling. Now you might say, well, why is wrestling useful? Well, if you're unarmed, or indeed armed, but if you're unarmed fighting against someone who's using a knife or dagger, pretty much, apart from running away, which is always your best strategy, assuming you can't run away, if you have to fight to defend yourself or defend your family or defend someone else, if you have to fight, basically wrestling, i.e. trying to disarm the person with the dagger or trying to disable or incapacitate their ability to use that knife or dagger, is your best strategy. Ergo, wrestling. Okay, striking a person, duking it out, staying at distance, without contact, without control, in other words, without controlling their knife or dagger, is not, generally speaking, a very good way to go, unless it's purely to hit the person, to cause them to stop or back off, or cause a bit of pain, so you can then run away, or you're delaying so the police can turn up, or things like that. But generally speaking, if someone attacks you with a knife, if you just start punching them, they're going to start punching you back, but they'll have a knife in their hands, and so you're going to generally come off a lot worse. So the best thing to do is to grapple them, to control that knife arm as best you can, and I know it's very difficult, you're always at a huge disadvantage. But wrestling is the main unarmed martial art of medieval Europe, because pretty much everyone in medieval Europe was armed. Might not necessarily be a weapon, an intentional weapon, but they all had at least an eating or hunting knife to hand, pretty much all of the time. So there we go. To sum up, I think largely in the medieval period, and this is a theory, this is not an absolute fact. I'm not saying I'm absolutely correct on this, but there is this, as I said at the beginning, elephant in the room, that there is no standing up boxing and kicking art outside of a sporting context. There is in fact a form of boxing in early Renaissance Italy, 14th, 15th, 16th century Italy, but that was very much a sporting context. Outside of sporting contexts, there's no evidence really of punching and kicking arts in medieval Europe, and I believe this is the reason why, because everybody had access to a knife. If everybody's got access to a knife, then if you're going to learn an unarmed martial art, you want to be looking at wrestling, jiu-jitsu type stuff. Okay, and of course medieval wrestling has a lot of parallels with Japanese medieval wrestling, i.e. jiu-jitsu. So there we go, folks. I hope that's, I guess to some of you this won't be news at all. If you have other ideas of why there aren't more punching and kicking things shown in medieval treatises, I'm all ears. As I say, I don't have all the answers, but I believe this is the main reason why pretty much the main unarmed martial art we see in medieval treatises is wrestling and not pugilism. Cheers, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.